Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Aron Nimzowitsch, my system. The customary quote: I attend to my fitness, I go the gym every day and try to maintain my physical fitness. Without that, it is tough to take challenges on the chessboard. From the Indian chess grandmaster and 5 times world chess champion Viswanathan Anand. In the last part, we went through games number 38, 40 and 42 of the Illustrative Game section of the book. Moving further, we will go through game number 43 of the Illustrative Game section of the book. This game was played between Aron Nimzowitsch versus Alexander ALEKHINE in 1926 during the Semmering tournament at Semmering, Austria. Nimzowitsch with the white pieces and ALEKHINE with the black. Notes by Aron Nimzowitsch. e4, knight f6, knight c3, d5, e5, knight d7, f4, e6, knight f3, c5, g3, knight c6 and bishop g2. Black's king's wing seems somewhat boxed in, but as compensation his center is the more mobile. Bishop e7, castles, castles, d3 and knight b6. d4 would have been bad because of knight e4 and the knight is centrally established. On the other hand, f6 was well worth consideration. For instance, e takes on f6, bishop takes on f6 and black controls the center. So knight b6, knight e2 and d4. Black wants to score the knight move as an error, for now the knight can no longer get to e4. This is, however, a mistake, and therefore it would have been much better to play f6 instead of d4. For example, f6, e takes on f6, bishop takes on f6, c3, e5, f takes on e5, knight takes on e5, and black would not stand badly. So d4, g4 and f6. This move, which black has twice passed over, leads now, thanks to the weakness of e4, to a result which promises little fruit. The prophylactic defense, rook e8, knight g3, bishop f8, knight e4 and knight d5, putting a stop to f5, would therefore have deserved the preference. So f6, e takes on f6 and g takes on f6. There was also no true joy to be got out of bishop takes on f6, knight g3, e5 and f5. So g takes on f6, knight g3 and knight d5. Black seeks to defend his threatened wing from the center, but this plan should not here have been sufficient to save the situation. Queen e2, bishop d6 and knight h4. To threaten, bishop takes on d5 followed by knight h to f5. Knight e7 and bishop d2. Knight h5 would have been sharper here. For example, knight h5. knight g6, bishop takes on d5, e takes on d5, and knight f5 with a winning attack. But bishop d2 was played by white in the game, and play continued with queen c7 and queen f2. Knight h5 was still preferable. So queen f2, c4, d takes on c4, and knight e3. With this ingenious diversion, Dr. ALEKHINE succeeds in bringing his opponent's attack to a standstill for some time. The game up to this point is discussed in part 2 of the book, chapter 1, topic number 6 and page 178, in connection with centralization. Bishop takes on e3, d takes on e3, queen f3, and queen takes on c4. The position is in a measure cleared up. Black has a passed pawn, which it is true is very sick, but very highly insured against death. We mean to say that the bishop diagonals c6 to h1 after bishop d7 to c6 and c5 to g1 are compensation. Instead of chasing after the dubious win of the pawn, it would have been more to the purpose had white gone on with his kingside attack, and this by g5. Neglect of this move throws white back. Knight e4, bishop c7, d3, queen d4, c3, queen b6, and king h1. White has localized the enemy thrust. Knight d5. Bishop d7 was certainly better. So knight d5 and f5. Here he misses his opportunity to play g5, which would have won. For instance, f takes on g5, knight takes on g5, rook takes on f4, and queen h5. Or f5 instead of f takes on g5. Queen h5, f takes on e4, bishop takes on e4, and so on. So f5, knight f4, rook d1, and king h8. Better, according to H. Wolf, would have been e2, rook d2, and queen b5, followed by queen e5. I am assuming the reference is to Heinrich Wolf, who was an Austrian journalist and chess master who played around the turn of the 20th century. Nimzowitsch continues. So king h8, bishop f1, e takes on f5, g takes on f5, bishop e5, rook e1, and bishop d7. The game proceeds as was indicated in the note to the 20th move. White wins the pawn, but black keeps the pressure by means of his two bishops. Rook takes on e3, bishop c6, rook e1, and knight d5. With rook g8, black could have increased the pressure. So knight d5, rook d3, and knight takes on c3. Pretty but insufficient. True, the acceptance of the sacrifice would have been ruinous. Rook takes on c3, bishop takes on c3, queen takes on c3, and queen f2. But white has a truly startling counter combination at his disposal. Knight g6 check, h takes on g4 and queen g4, double exclamation mark. The point, to strike at once, would have been bad. For example, f takes on g6, king g7, king h3, rook h8, rook d7 check, bishop takes on d7, queen takes on d7 check, king takes on g6, and white is threatened with mate. So queen g4 and rook f7 question mark. Rook g8 was imperative. The continuation would have been f takes on g6, king g7, rook d7 check, bishop takes on d7, queen takes on d7 check, king takes on g6, bishop d3, king h6, queen h3 check, king g7, rook g1 check, queen takes on g1 check, and the win is still far away. So rook f7, rook h3 check, king g7, bishop c4, bishop d5, f takes on g6, knight takes on e4, g takes on f7 discovered check, king f8, and rook takes on e4. A simpler win would have been queen g8 check, king e7, f8 queen, rook takes on f8, rook h7 check, king e8, and queen takes on d5. So rook takes on e4, bishop takes on e4 check, queen takes on e4, king e7, f8 queen, the passed pawns lust to expand. Rook takes on f8, queen d5, and queen d6. Queen c6 would have led not to the exchange of queens but to the loss of his queen, namely rook h7 check, king e8, and bishop e5. So queen d6, queen takes on b7 check, king d8, rook d3, bishop d4, queen e4, rook e8, and rook takes on d4, where black resigned the game. Next is game number 44, which was played between E. Andersson, R. Enstrom, O. Oberg, likely amateur players, versus Aron Nimzowitsch in a consultation game at Uppsala, Sweden in 1921. Nimzowitsch writes of the game as following: illustrates in an instructive manner the connection between play in the center on the one hand and diversions undertaken on the wings on the other. The dependence of a flank attack for success on the state of health of the center is very clearly brought out. One of 4 simultaneous consultation games. Andersson, Enstrom, and Oberg with the white pieces, and Nimzowitsch with the black. Notes by Aron Nimzowitsch. e4, e6, d4, d5, and knight c3. The right move is e5 instead. Knight c3 is considered quite playable as well today in modern times. Nimzowitsch continues. Bishop b4, bishop d3, and knight c6. A new train of thought. Knight e2, knight e7, castles, castles, and e5. Looks very good. knight f5, bishop e3 and f6. Black has now got over the difficulties of the opening. Bishop takes on f5, e takes on f5, f4 and bishop e6, obedient to the law that a passed pawn must be blockaded. Knight g3, bishop takes on c3, b takes on c3 and knight a5. It was only reluctantly and after much deliberation that I determined on this diversion on the extreme flank. It looks risky, since the situation in the center is by no means secure. For one of my leading principles lays down that a flank attack is only justified if the center is secure. Yet in the present case, White cannot force his opponent to play f takes on e5. And if White takes the f pawn himself, he gets, it is true, the point e5 after rook takes on f6. But Black, by bringing up his reserves, can mitigate this danger. Queen d3, Queen d7, rook f3, g6, knight e2, rook f7, h4, h5, king h2 and rook f8. The reserves, see the last note. Rook g3, king h7 and knight g1. Aiming for g5 or e5. It will be seen that the consulting players are thoroughly exercised in the art of maneuvering and are opponents to be taken seriously. Rook g7, knight f3 and queen a4. At last, Black proceeds with the attack to which his 11th move was the prelude. This slowness is all to his credit. E takes on f6, rook takes on f6, knight g5 check, king g8, bishop g1, knight c4, rook e1 and bishop d7, double exclamation mark. This simple strategical retreat reveals my plan of defense. As my system lays down, the ideal aimed at by every operation in a file is the entry to the 7th and 8th ranks. However, here the points of invasion e7 and e8 are safeguarded, and the rook at g3 cannot cooperate since the rook is deprived of the square e3. Knight f3, bishop e5, queen d1, queen takes on a2, queen e2 and knight d6, double exclamation mark. With this retreat, a maneuver is started which is designed to neutralize the enemy's apparent stronghold on the e-file. Less good would have been queen a3 with the idea of getting home safely with the booty by means of queen d6. Thus, queen a3, knight e5, queen d6, knight takes on c4, bishop takes on c4, queen f2, rook e6, rook e5, and White still has drawing chances, whereas the phlegmatic or calm maneuver in the text, knight d6, wins. Queen e5 and knight e8. With this, the regrouping rook d6 and knight f6 is threatened, whereby the rook and knight will have exchanged stations. If White prevents this by knight g5, If rook d6 question mark, queen takes on e5 check and mate next move. So knight g5, then white will be undoubtedly strong in the e-file. Yet the distinctive characteristic of the position, namely the spearhead station of white's queen, will prevent him from taking full advantage of the file. For instance, knight g5, bishop c6, rook e3, and queen takes on c2. Or rook e2 instead of rook e3, queen c4, blockade, rook e3, a5, and wins. For knight e6, question mark is impossible because of rook e7, and he has no other effective move in the e-file at his disposal. In the game, the continuation after knight e8 was knight d2, rook d6, c4, bishop d7, rook c3, and knight f6. And now this difficult regrouping maneuver under enemy fire has been successfully carried out. C takes on d5, double question mark, a gross mistake. But even after queen e2, rook e6, queen d1, and rook e7, white's game would have been hopeless. So c takes on d5 and knight g4 check, where white resigned the game. Next is game number 45, which was played between Fred Dewhirst Yates versus Aron Nimzowitsch in the London tournament of 1927 at London, England. Nimzowitsch writes of the game as following. In the following game, two armies out of contact with one another operate in the center and on a flank. It is interesting to see how contact is finally established between them. Yates with the white pieces and Nimzowitsch with the black. Notes by Aron Nimzowitsch. e4, c5, knight f3, and knight f6. The innovation introduced by me in 1911 at San Sebastian, Spain. e5 and knight d5. The relationship between the ALEKHINE defense e4, knight f6, introduced in 1921, and my treatment of the Sicilian will be noted. Reference to Boguljubov's application of the idea in d4, knight c6. So knight d5, bishop c4, knight b6, bishop e2, and knight c6. White has lost a tempo with his bishop. On the other hand, the knight at b6 is not particularly well placed, so that the bishop maneuver is not to be criticized. c3, d5, and d4. We should have given e takes on d6 en passant the preference. So d4, c takes on d4, c takes on d4, bishop f5, castles, e6, knight c3, bishop e7, and knight e1. If the attack planned by this move, namely f4 with g4 and f5, should really prove possible to carry out, this would be a proof of the incorrectness of bishop f5, and that would be an absurdity. In point of fact, the matter stands thus: no particular result is achieved by knight e1, and this diversion would better have been abandoned in favor of a systematic utilization of the c-file. For example, bishop e3, castles and rook c1, followed by a3, b4, knight d2 to b3 to c5, when the establishment of an outpost advocated by my system would have been attained. So knight e1, knight d7 and bishop g4, cleverly played. The answer to f4 would have been, of course, knight takes on d4, queen takes on d4, double question mark, and bishop c5. Bishop e3 would also have been unfavorable because of knight takes on e5, d takes on e5, d4, bishop d2, d takes on c3, bishop takes on c3, and queen c7 with advantage in position for black. By the text move bishop g4, Yates is able in a quite startling manner to make the advance f4 at which he was aiming. Bishop g6, f4, knight takes on d4, knight takes on d5, and knight c6. If bishop c5, then b4 would have been strong for white. E takes on d5 would also have been bad because of bishop takes on d7 check, followed by queen takes on d4. As such, knight c6, knight takes on e7, queen b6 check, king h1, knight takes on e7, and queen a4. A typical sin of omission. In the face of black's obvious plan to occupy the central points, white should, by himself centralizing, have disputed them with his opponent. Thus, queen e2, intending bishop e3, knight d5, bishop f3, queen c5, bishop d2, knight b6, rook c1, queen e7, and white has more of the center than black, and even if such a more were not attainable, what matter? Even in this case, white ought to have fought for it. As it is, a just punishment now overtakes him. So queen a4, h5, and bishop h3. Post. For if bishop f3, then knight f5 with a further gain of terrain in the center. Moreover, there would then be a mating threat in the air, namely h4 and knight g3 check. So bishop h3, bishop f5, queen a3, and queen b5, making room for the knight at d7, which is aiming for d5 via b6. King g1, knight b6, queen f3, knight d5, b3, queen b6 check, rook f2, and rook c8. This move, in conjunction with the one following, leads to a decentralizing of black's king's rook, and so to a defect in his position which has been so harmoniously constructed. On the other hand, castles long held out the promise of harmony, for after king b8 and g6, nothing stood in the way of employing the two rooks centrally. For example, rook d7 and rook c8 to follow. However, bishop g4 seems to be still better. For instance, bishop takes on g4, h takes on g4, queen takes on g4, rook takes on h2, queen takes on g7, castles long, king takes on h2, queen takes on f2, knight d3, queen e2, and black must win. Or lastly, it was also possible to combine the two plans, thus castles long, bishop a3, and now bishop g4. If then perhaps rook c1 check, king b8, bishop c5, then queen takes on c5, rook takes on c5, bishop takes on f3, rook takes on f3, and rook c8 with a victorious incursion via the c-file. Black, however, played rook c8, and play continued with bishop t2 and rook h6. Interesting, for when all is said and done, black's position, centralized even to the extent that it is, can support an adventurous raid. Yet, castles instead of rook h6, g6, and rook f to d8 was certainly more correct. So rook h6, rook d1, bishop takes on h3, queen takes on h3, knight f5, queen d3, rook g6, knight f3, rook g4, h3, rook g3, a4, and knight h4. Black's structure suffers from an inner discord or disagreement. The position of the cut-off rook makes a mating attack seem desirable, but the disposition of the rest of the army is rather directed towards the endgame, in which the knight at d5 would have enormous effect, while the white squares would be in black's undisputed possession. King f1 and rook c6 to draw the sting of the threat, queen h7 and a queen g8 check. The rook runs away b times or before time. Black has in fact to maneuver very cautiously. a5, queen d8, king g1 and knight f5. Knight takes on f3 check, rook takes on f3, rook takes on f3, queen takes on f3, g6 would not have been good because of f5. So knight f5, king h2, a6 and queen b1 to threaten knight d4. Queen e7. He does not mind the threat. has his eye moreover on queen c5. Knight d4 question mark loses. Rook c1 was better. So knight d4 and queen h4. As the detachments which have been cut off cannot get back to the army, the latter comes to them. Bishop e1. If knight takes on c6, then rook takes on h3 check and mate in 2 moves. So bishop e1 and knight takes on f4, again threatening mate, this time by rook takes on g2 check and so on. Rook takes on f4, rook takes on g3, rook takes on h3 check, simplest. G takes on h3, queen takes on f4 check, king g2 and knight e3 check and mate in 2 moves. For this game, I was awarded the special prize of £10 for the best played game in the tournament. Alright, we conclude this part of Aron Nimzowitsch My System here, and we shall continue onwards from the next one. Here is a look at the recent channel support from my Twitch stream. Several new supporters: Himurak 91, 95 Horatio, Slaggy, Bean Power 12, C Dallas 357, and Trevlar. 95 Horatio is John Davis, who is a chess enthusiast and occasional streamer from USA. Slaggy is an international master, originally from the US, now living in Budapest, Hungary. He has an instructional and regular stream on Twitch. I will post a link to both of their respective streaming channels in the video description. Do check them out. Thank you for the kind support, everyone. Much appreciated. Alright, till next time, take care.